for our 20th anniversary, our 20th birthday of SOUPS, we wanted to bring together a set of people who have really devoted a lot to SOUPS, and to have some time for reflection, but also some time for looking forward. And so we're gonna do a conversation here. I'm gonna do my best to keep everybody on this stage on track to the extent that I can. We'll see how that goes. And we're just gonna have a pretty open conversation. I look forward to some audience questions at the end, so if you have some questions that you'll be interested in, we would love to make time for that. I think before we get started, let's just very quickly go down the line, and I would love everyone to just introduce themselves in like the one-sentence intro before we get to some of these slides. Mez.
Hi, I'm Mary Ellen Zurko. I go by my three-letter acronym, which is MEZ. I currently work at MIT Lincoln Laboratory, and my slide will tell you more about me.
Hi, I'm Simson Garfinkel. I'm I'm a dilettante, and and I have several slides.
I'm Robert Biddle. I'm professor of computer science and cognitive science at Carleton University in Canada, and also the University of Auckland in New Zealand.
Oh, how did I miss that?
I'm Lorrie, Cranor. You already heard from me.
I started SOUPS.
I'm Katharina, Krombholz, faculty at CISPA Helmholtz Center for Information Security in Germany, and this year's program co-chair.
Great, and a few of our participants here on this panel have decided to prepare a few slides to sort of set the tone of this conversation and to give us a little bit of even the prehistory of what we think of as SOUPS. So to get us started, Mez.
So hi, this is I decided I would do the prehistory of usable security before SOUPS. And so in 1975, Sulzer and Schroeder wrote a paper on a number of cybersecurity principles, and one of them was psychological acceptability. After that, it was promptly forgotten, whereas many of the other privileges, like least privileged, were used. Until, like, what is that year? I can't even read it. I should have brought my cheat sheet. In 1980, it's got to be 85. 1990, there we go. See, like, what year is that? In 1990, I was co-author on a paper at Oakland on a high assurance virtual machine monitor that won a Best Paper Award at Oakland. It was like the last year they gave Best Paper Awards for a while, because after that they were like, you can't have Best Papers. And I worked on the UI of a high assurance virtual machine monitor. Nobody really wanted that job. And I wanted to do UI for something that had no political implications whatsoever, that nobody cared about. And so that's how I got into cybersecurity. In 1996, I published a paper called User-Centered Security at New Security Paradigms Workshop. I made it as radical as I could possibly think of at the time. I said, what if we actually centered all of our security around the humans? Like, start with the humans all the time. I feel like that we've surpassed that in so many ways as a community, which is just wonderful. What's the next year? Right, and then in 1990, what's that year? 99, right, when everything started blossoming. Why Johnny can't encrypt, which Lorrie pointed out. Also, the user is not the enemy, Adams and Sassy, and I didn't know that, like, the first graphical passwords paper came out that year until I read the amazing book in the top right there that Simson will be talking about more. And at Oakland, I actually published a paper on RBAC that included usability testing of an RBAC UI. It was promptly forgotten. So in 2000, what year was that? Thank you. In 2002, I published a paper at ACSAC that's since gotten the Test of Time Award that had the first attacker model. So before then, usable security published papers were all very enabling, because we're a very enabling, loving community. So I had, and I was doing this in industry, and so I didn't have to even think about IRBs. I now have 2 IRBs. And it was the first to measure users in the wild. And then, right, the year that SOUPS came out, I was given the opportunity to give a keynote at ACSAC called Stepping Up to the Grand Challenge on Usable Security. So I got a chance to lecture everybody on what needs to be done to make security usable, and that was great fun. A patent issued for secure UI that I had co-developed back in the UI for A1 virtual machine monitors. It had been the center of a Supreme Court case, Dickinson v. Zurko. We lost the Supreme Court case, but we still went back and got the patent. That's a whole other story. And a group of people put out the second round of cyber hard problems. I am currently working on the third round of cyber hard problems for this year for the National Academies, and one of the authors of that round of cyber hard problems has said in public that it was totally a mistake that they didn't include humans and usable security in that year's cyber hard problems. And why didn't they? Because we didn't have a community. And then Lorrie brought us together. I got to be co-program chair as invited by Lorrie, along with Claire Marie Carrot, the biggest memory I have of the first SOUPS is visiting Lorrie in her office, having moved from AT&T to CMU, being a new professor, and her whiteboard was full of proposals and what their status was for money, because that's what new professors do, is like work out their funding sources.
And I had none.
Yes, and she had Zippo. So like all you folks who are going through that now, or will go through that soon, or everybody goes through it. It was amazing. So that is my very personal prehistory.
I would love to hear reflections from anybody else here who was, working through this time, looking at that sort of community, the sort of pre-SOUPS, and thinking about like how usable security was manifesting or not manifesting in those days. What are some of the things that right before the creation of SOUPS led to that we really do need more community here?
So the key point I want to make is that it was inherently interdisciplinary, and the advice that people get in graduate school is not to do interdisciplinary work. Now, that's less so now, but the reason is because there's no place to put it. And so it was very difficult to get publications that did that intersection. It was hard to find people who knew about that intersection. So usable security is no longer interdisciplinary, it's now a discipline. But there are other things that we're not talking about here that are interdisciplinary, and it's likely that many people in the audience are interested in those things. And the advice is it's really, really hard to do it by yourself, and it's even harder to do it when you have other people to do it with.
So the suggestion is give up?
Well, it depends on whether
it's going to hurt.
you want to be
hard things.
whether you want to be a trailblazer or not, but most people who are trailblazers fail. So, you have to really push. And it's a testimony to the community that we had many people who really pushed.
Are we all answering that question?
You don't have to. You could. Okay.
You don't all have to answer these questions.
He told us.
I stick to it.
Don't
Okay.
go on the line. That's what he told us.
So this initial community got together. Lorrie brought people together with SOUPS. We saw some of the sort of the earliest parts of that this morning. And Simson, you've put together a few slides that are focused a bit on sort of what some of those themes were, what some of the research that came out of that was.
So a little bit more detail. Around the time of 2005, Lorrie and I did a collaborative issue of IEEE Security and Privacy on usable security, and there were a lot of submissions for it, and we couldn't print them all. So we then did a book on usable security and privacy that was published by O'Reilly & Associates, and that was at sort of the beginning of the SOUPS thing also. And then 10 years in, it wasn't supposed to be 10 years in, but about 5 years in, I started working on a big literature review. There had been a usable security bibliography that had been maintained, but it was getting unwieldy. And I just ran into a lot of problems. And so Heather, one day at a SOUPS, actually, I said to Heather, I'm working on this literature review, would you like to help me? And so the idea was to get it out in a few months. And what we did was we started systematically going through the entire publication history of every single usable security conference, journal, and so forth. And we ended up with this 80, 90-page literature review, which nobody would publish. And so they told us to put it into a book. So this is that book, and it is now out of date, but so it's now a historical thing, which gives you the first 10 years. That's the outline. On the next slide, you'll see what we did was we came up with lessons learned from those first 10 years. Some of those lessons still apply, like reduce decisions, have safe and secure defaults, although we learned today that for one of the things you should have no defaults and make people make decisions. On the next slide, you'll see that we took the major themes in that research, and Heather and I put this slide together a few days ago. We took each of the topics and we said what the status is today. So this is taking the research and bringing it to the present. And I invite each of you to go through and to argue whether or not we've actually made success on these, because there's no objective way that we came up with these statuses. These were just very ad hoc. And at the bottom, you'll see that like security administrators and administration, there's a workshop on that, but in the mainstream, it's largely ignored. We still are largely focused on users, where users are defined as end users and sometimes programmers, but almost never system admins and almost never policymakers. They're not users either. On the last slide, on the next slide, you'll see what we identified as the challenges between the first 10 years. And some of those challenges are largely solved. And some of those challenges are just too hard to make progress on. And some of the challenges, I have no idea what we're doing, like teaching. How do we teach usable security other than have people read our papers? Like that's not the right way to teach a body of work. You also have to cite them. And like consumer privacy, sort of, that has blown up, and it's still a challenge, but at least people are taking it seriously. Adversarial modeling, like we kind of understand the adversaries, so we don't model them much anymore because we're surrounded by them. And authentication, it's a big problem. It's everywhere. It's getting harder. On the next slide, you'll see this is just Google Trends, and it's showing you that in terms of usable security, like if there was a few peaks. I think this is more sampling error on the part of Google. But I want to point out the Google Trends on the bottom. This is really important. You'll see that there's a lot in North America. There's like a little bit in South America, some in Europe, Australia, New Zealand. There's like nothing in South America. There actually are people doing computer science in South America. And so this is just a general problem we have in the North American computer science community. We don't reach out to those people, and when they submit papers, we don't take them seriously. And so I'd like to encourage everybody here to reach out and to try to figure out how to broaden our inclusivity. And those were the points I wanted to make, so thank you.
You don't have to use this slide as a reference, but I think one of the questions that we are trying to think about now is looking back, what have been some of the major landmark research findings, right? Like if we had to point to SOUPS and say, we've been doing this for 20 years, this covers the first 10, what have we figured out? What have we solved?
I would say a lot of the work in what to do when you have an error in the context of security. I get to cite in all kinds of ways, you know. So in newer contexts, like Ben Kaiser's work on countering disinformation used the work that the community had learned about errors and attention. So I think we made some really good strides in how to think about and do well or better or more effectively errors when you are sure it's a problem, phishing errors, errors when you aren't sure it's a problem, certificate errors. but they haven't been extracted and reapplied in all the ways they could be.
Largely in admin.
Yeah, I mean, browser security warnings have almost gone away at this point. And the first few SOUPs, we were talking a lot about what to do about these browser security warnings. And I teach this in my usable security class. And this past semester, when I got to that lecture, I was like, browser security warnings. Oh wait, you all probably haven't seen any.
But that happened because we put less trust in certificates now.
And we hid certificates.
We hid certificates. And if you run Google Chrome in high security mode, you'll still get those errors. So we also kind of gave up on it.
Well, Google gave up on it.
Which was the right thing to do.
But I think, from a usability perspective, it was the right thing to do.
Absolutely.
When you're not sure, and the user can't possibly understand, like.
Well, I believe in PKI.
I know
it's
that.
like a religion.
I know that's you.
I have a deep desire to
little
have.
email heartbreak. I know that's yours. Yeah. That one. That little heart, the red heartbreak. That's Simpson's heart.
I deeply believe in the promise of PKI.
I actually also use this example in my class, also as a success story. I actually use this in the very first lecture to motivate people to work in this field. And I think what is so exciting about also this type of problem that now we understand so much better that we shouldn't place too much burden on end users. At least that's what I think for me is one of the biggest lessons learned out of this. And also that we learned that this disruptive security concept just doesn't work at all. You can't just, interrupt a user's main task with a security warning. It will just not get you anywhere. So I think this is great, and I think we need more of these success stories. I mean, we also see a lot of industry impact. I mean, we also have seen development of Let's Encrypt, Certbot, and these kinds of things. So I think this was really a nice joint effort. I think what we've also learned, from my perspective, I came in much later than all of you did, but is that now we understand problems just so much better. Unfortunately, for many of these problems, I think we're not yet there that we have a solution, but we at least understand the problems much better. And what we also have learned is that people are repeating the mistakes over and over again. Because a lot of the studies we've been doing in the last years, they actually show things that we could have probably guessed before, but just because the new technology repeats these design mistakes over and over. And I think this is actually maybe a call for action for the new generation, like also think more about solutions to these problems and focusing also more on design work. At least I personally would be really, really excited to see more of these works at SOUPS.
And she was papers chair, so she would have accepted those papers if you were writing them. What else? What are the other results or papers, whether they're SOUPS papers or sort of other usable security, usable privacy, findings that excite us?
All.
I think it's great that we have solved the device pairing problem. There was you don't remember. Nobody remembers, but it was really, really hard to pair devices. Like even the idea that you would pair devices, and 15 years ago, people were typing 30-digit hexadecimal keys on two devices. And now, my phone gives me a password, and I see that phone on my car, and it's the same number. I say, yeah, go for it. And if they're not the same number, I don't know what happens. Or similar, because it never happens, right? Or similar, like Microsoft Authenticator, the little app that does authentication, and Microsoft shows me 4 numbers, and I have to pick the correct number, the number that's on that screen over there. And if I get it wrong, I try again. But then they have some AI in the back end doing more stuff. But a lot of this stuff just works now, and so the attackers have had to go on to other things. And they've gone on to pig butchering and romance scams, and they're just really hurting a smaller number of people with much more horribleness.
Right. I'm excited, personally excited by the fact that we've broadened beyond end users as a community. There was, as Simson points out, there was this little blip where we tried to do admins, and and anyway, but then we like people other than me started doing developers, and that is huge impact. And there's more and more papers on other security specialists or other specialists who impact the security, other things that we use. And anyway, I'm really excited that we're able to do that. But as the Blip administrators points out, it's really hard to do for certain classes of users. So, yeah.
Yeah, we've seen a broadening, I think, in general of just sort of we will just go do basic usability testing on whoever happens to show up, to we need to look at developers. We need to work with specific marginalized or vulnerable populations. We need to look at CISOs, like, and experts that we've seen some of these papers today. And so that is a much more focused version of sort of looking across what users are.
I think we've learned a lot about how to do research in this area. I think, if you look at the quality of the studies that we're publishing now, it's like a lot better. I look at my old papers and go, really? I wrote that? You wrote that?
Yeah.
No, but I think we've learned how to have rigorous and repeatable methods. We've learned how to document our methods so that other people can learn from them and repeat them. We've learned how to do things at scale. A lot of our early studies, if we didn't get people coming into our lab, then we didn't have users for our study, and that really limits you. And we've learned how to go beyond that.
I think what we can also be very proud of as a community is that we have a lot of impact beyond SOUPS. Because I remember when I submitted my first user studies to top security conferences, where when I submitted a qualitative paper, I got as a review, the sample size is too small and the sample is not representative. And there's no stats in the paper. And I think that has changed a lot, because now usable security is a thing in all of the top security conferences, and we are being taken seriously for what we do. And I think this is something we can really be proud, and I actually want to thank all of you for actually laying the foundation for this, because I myself have seen in my early years of my PhD how hard it actually is to convince people that users are not just stupid.
Just name a slide? Give her a slide.
Oh, yeah. Great point. Would you like to talk about your slide?
Say yes.
I think if I stayed here long enough, everyone else would make the points that several people have said what is perhaps the most important thing, which is this conference, SOUPS, as begun by Lorrie and others, built this community. There is now a usable security discipline, as Simson says, community is ever because of SOUPS. And so I wear my Lorrie Cranor tie.
Yes.
With the most popular passwords on a pattern developed by Lorrie on my tie and her beautiful dress. And back in the day, these were freely available. Well, not freely available, but the pattern was free, and you could buy the fabrics. I don't know if that's true. And also my John Carrot, Don no longer with us, who had a fondness of Pacifica shirts, and Mez is also honoring that tradition.
Today.
So the community was huge. And it also had an important goal. This was something I really liked about the community. There was something to push about. There was a need for this. So I want to recap some victories and some challenges. So the first victory, and this point has just been made about we are now in the main venues about security, but it goes more broadly than that. We have successfully invaded security. There is no doubt that what we do now is critical to computer security. It also helps us in terms of getting jobs in order to pursue our work. For those of you who are students, this is really important. As someone whose background is in human factors, psychology, security, welcome. You are now a cybersecurity expert. Play your cards right, and you will also be a data scientist. Play your cards carefully right in the data science techniques you use, and you will now also be a machine learning expert. collect these cards, and that's the key to a useful career. We've also mentioned here the rigor. We do lots of stats. We learned about effect size. Some of us are learning about Bayesian methods. We've learned about qualitative data analysis. All this is really important. It's important, however, especially for those on the program committee, to not be total zealots and to think about the honesty and how much the results really do reflect the reality. I'm kind of a bit concerned about artificial scarcity in research, and I think if research really is valuable, I like to see it published and not go into a loop of satisfying every zealot who's on a program committee. Now, more than all of that, and this point has been talked about tangentially here, we've learned stuff about human behavior. We, even I, have learned stuff about the psychology of memory that I have never seen in a book on memory or from memory experts in the academic world that I know. We've learned stuff about decisions. We've learned stuff about attention. We've learned stuff about persuasion. All of this science we've embraced, and we've learned stuff. This might not always seem wonderful to the people who are doing what they call basic science in the neurology of this, but in terms of the applied world, we're learning things, and I think we should be proud of that and want to share those findings. The only problem is interacting with computers, human-computer interaction, increasingly involves all of human activity. Therefore, it's not just that kind of science, it's sociology, it's economics, it's politics, it's whatever scientific field deals with adversariality, intelligence studies. That's all now in scope to basically standing up to the challenges that we face. So a little bit about the challenge. The number one challenge I think that we have is provenance. Where did this come from exactly? Who sent this exactly? Who is responsible for this? This relates to web certificates. It relates to authentication. To a surprising amount, we've given up. With the misinformation and disinformation, even with authentication, we have to deal with heuristics. This relates to phishing. Phishing, I think, is the most embarrassing, pathetic failure of the whole internet industry that I can imagine. I was asked recently by an ethics committee about what to say about, how people can certainly avoid phishing. And I have to say, you can't. Cybersecurity experts get phished. They really do. This is pathetic, and it's all because we've given up on provenance. We have some good PKI that helped us do it. We've largely forgotten that. We had, with even the original organizational certificates, and even more so with extended validity certificates, we gave up on all of that. What did we get? Let's encrypt. Well, okay. But we've always had self-signed certificates. Tell me why Let's Encrypt is better than a self-signed certificate, which you could make automatic. It protects DNS hacking. That's all. We gave up. Why did we give up? Well, there's some reasons, but I'd like to point out how bad not knowing provenance is. It means that we can't delegate successfully. Nobody can be relied on for taking responsibility for certain things. Provenance is something we really have to care a lot more about, and it's not being. And this brings me to my next point of a challenge, is business models and decisions. We work in our area of science and scholarship with the backdrop of enormously powerful global organizations. And sometimes they read our papers, but mostly not. And when we do research about their products, we're dealing with a mystery box. Why did they do this thing? Why did they kill extended validity certificates? Why did they decide to allow this authentication and not that? We don't know. We can't reach in.
Sure we do.
We do know why they killed extended
We
validity.
do, absolutely.
Because the more of them were issued to illegitimate entities than legitimate entities.
Okay, that is claimed. That's like saying we should get rid of speeding limits because, you know, some people speed. I don't think we should have given up.
And the reason the financial industry was behind it in the first place is that they simply wanted people to be more comfortable doing online banking.
Right. So
they weren't really there. They were really there to extend the market.
Right.
Not to secure.
Right. But the point is, this is all our surmise. We're observing.
No, it's not. No. I worked with people in the financial industry when this stuff got kicked off. That is what I just said is not surmise.
They also thought they could sell the advertising section in the browser.
But my point is, we are working against this very pragmatic backdrop. How do we do science when this big action thing is working in this pragmatic, self-interested kind of way? Now, in the real world, we do have answers to that. We do have laws. There is enforcement, okay? But here, we're just almost pretending that this giant force doesn't exist. Lots of people, in answer to my question of why don't we have certificates, it said, people found it too difficult to deal with the certificates. That's the standard answer I've gotten from some of this. I just don't believe we tried very hard because basically there were more important issues by the large organizations. Simson, disagree?
Well, I was going to say that we gave up on PKI, but now we have DocuSign. And so you get an email and you create an account and you don't even sign it with your signature. You sign it typed. And it's legally binding because we've decided that that's good enough for commerce.
Yeah, so this is like the banks who basically just cover up anything until it gets huge enough to destroy the bank.
And then the government takes care of it.
Or not.
No.
I mean,
So-
ink signatures weren't really very secure to
That's right. Ink signatures, right. So society, as we know, is largely based on trust. It's not based on enforcement. It's certainly not based on detection.
So, ransomware,
Yeah.
okay?
That's not on your slide.
Well, no, because it's very specific, but it's a lack of provenance, I claim. The reason it's on my slide there under business model decision is, so what are we doing? Are we doing science or are we doing investigative journalism, right?
We do a lot of investigative journalism.
Yeah, but we're not basically saying that's what we're really doing, and we're
Well,
not going at
Simpson
it
is
hard.
a
Oh, so you are, because you're a journalist. Right.
He's got a book coming.
Right. But in this community, largely, I mean, yeah, okay, I'll take that point.
Yeah.
I don't want to do that. I don't want to be the nuisance kind of advocate. I don't like being out there. I like doing the science.
You believe that there's an inner truth, a fundamental truth about the way humans think
No.
that you can uncover.
No, this is the next point that I have.
Ooh, good.
Culture, politics, and boundaries, right? Basically, we started with a gold rush or a land rush. It's still going on. There's an enormous amount at stake. And basically, we've lived in the Wild West, basically where power is law, right? And what I would like to see is the growth of civilization, or rather civilizations. And I think now we're seeing that. We're seeing that with the EU passing laws that are upset that only apply to the EU, but they're trying. We even see things happening in other civilizations, but at least they're kind of taking charge. And so we're moving away from this Wild West. But it's happening in a kind of chaotic, untracked kind of thing. I want to live in a civilized place. And basically, I think that some of the work we're doing can lead to that. But I think we have to be conscious of that kind of movement. I'm working with a brilliant architecture student right now. And she quoted the work of an architect and artist that I know, but I hadn't known this bit, the Austrian-New Zealand architect, Friedrich Hundertwasser, who talks about the different levels of architecture being the 5 skins of civilization. And he talks about urban planning, essentially, as being the highest level skin that we have, that we inhabit. And her point is, with which I agree, is that the internet is now part of that. It is the skin which encompasses all of us. It is a civilization, it's a culture, but basically we're riding the chaos of the gold rush and the Wild West still, and I think that's an enormous challenge for what we do.
So can you address the partitioning of the internet between the Western world and China?
Well, I was kind of alluding to that when I talked about the other civilizations that are kind of happening, right? And basically other dictatorial regimes which control their internet access as a source of power. I don't think it makes sense to only have one civilization. The world has never had one civilization. And I think it's worth seriously considering how people accept different cultural and different civilizational rules. And in the internet, basically, starting off with the hugely utopian kind of views that we had back in the 90s, we kind of got, that's what's going to happen, and it's not, and I think we should face up to it.
I want to catch you all up to what just happened. So, as you can see, and also note, I work at one of those black box companies. For the moment, we are somewhat approachable sometimes, some of us, parts of it. A thing that is happening is we're like, oh, there have been great successes. We brought an amazing community together. We have figured out how to do research. And in the face of that, we have all of the disasters that were just talked about, certificates, phishing, ransomware, all of the things that are still going wrong and that we have not solved as a community on our own. That might be what comes next. And so one of the things that I know we want to get to and we want to be able to talk about as you all start thinking about questions, because you're up next, and there will only be time for like 2, is
Put them in the Slack.
what do we do? What do we do for the people who are showing up now as PhD students and are about to embark on the next 20 years of this? How do they deal with the formation of multiple internet civilizations? How do they deal with the fact that people are still getting phished, and when they are asked, oh, you're a usable security person, how do I fix phishing? Their answer is still, yeah, no. What is the advice we give them as they start down this not quite as interdisciplinary field and define the next years, decades?
I was never a PhD student. I'm not.
Well, I'll give 2 brief questions on there with reference to my slide, which is still there. One is focus on doing science, which can give us understanding, even if it doesn't solve practical problems. Very few of us in our research get to do anything important in the world, but we can in our papers articulate some kind of understanding which might give the spark to someone else. And focusing on the science helps that. Also, I would like to encourage people from business schools, from economics, to study some of this kind of thing. The tagline on my thing about provenance is, free is the enemy of the cheap. You probably all heard the rule that the best is the enemy of the good. Free is the enemy of the cheap is what destroys so much of the things that could be better on our internet.
Yeah, that's fine. We're just talking.
Basically, with certificates, they had to be free. Services had to be free, and the cost is surveillance. The idea is that even if it was let's talk about phishing, right? If buying a certificate only cost $1 a year, that would still be harmful to all kinds of people who basically are using valid, domain-validated certificates for their phishing sites that last less than a day and suck people in. If they had to pay even $1 for every domain name, that would be a bit of a drag on the system. But what happens? Ordinary people, when they had to pay money for an extended validity certificate, balked. Facebook never had one. They never had an extended validity. When I talk to people starting businesses, pay $1,000 for someone to investigate whether I'm a real organization? No. What's my tax bill? I'll pay that. Where's my license from the city? I'll pay that. An extended validity certificate for my e-commerce site? No, I need it to be free. That's crazy talk. I want economists and business school people to study that.
Make a friend with an economist.
Also, I think what's really important, I mean, we can be very proud of having this wonderful methodological toolkit, which actually, I mean, as you said, we do have a lot of rigor, and we should be proud of that. But I think we're not there yet. So I think, look left and right, and go in the world with an open heart and an open mind, because probably we do need more methods. Probably we need to be again more interdisciplinary instead of sticking to our very own discipline that we have right now, because I think so many new things are there to be explored. And I think the most boring thing you could do is probably just do incremental stuff. I mean, incremental stuff is very, very important, but I think sometimes also the whole publishing thing encourages this more than it should be. So don't be afraid of new challenges, and just look a little bit more left and right and think outside the box. And talk to people from all other fields.
Well, I'm completely opposed to what you said.
What a surprise, Simson.
I have two recommendations for early PhDs. The first is, follow the money. And so I wouldn't do phishing, I would do business email compromises, because there's far more money being lost by business email compromise than by consumer phishing. And the second thing I would say is...
I didn't say consumer phishing.
Okay.
I mean,
There's
ransomware comes from business hit phishing. Ransomware, because of that, with ordinary clerical users of hospitals and airports, has affected the infrastructure in their world. I surmise that people have died in hospitals because of phishing attacks to ordinary clerical people who mistakenly clicked on a well-crafted phishing email.
There are all kinds of ways that ransomware takes hold, and that is a thing worth studying. The second thing that I would suggest is focus on impact. Find the biggest, hardest problem, and find the people who are willing to pay to solve that problem, because they are the ones that are going to fund your research. It's great to get funding from NSF. Lorrie is fabulous at doing that. It's great to get funding from businesses. It's great to get funding from government agencies, but solve real problems.
Questions?
If you have questions, you should start lining up while they figure out how to deal with the fact that they don't want incremental papers, they want big, impactful papers, and that is maybe not what PhD students should be doing if they want to write more than one paper in 5 years.
Yeah, well, and
so
I want to disagree a little bit with that, in that I think that some of my biggest impact has been little impacts, right? And unfunded projects that I did quickly because there seemed to be an opportunity to strike while the iron was hot, and I did it with the money between the couch cushions, right? Because that's what we had. So, just an example of that is the privacy choices icon, the little blue icon that's on the bottom of most websites now. We designed at Carnegie Mellon, the University of Michigan, as kind of a side project because we heard that the state of California was looking for advice in 90 days. Right? And that turned into multiple memos to the California Attorney General, a published CHI paper, and now it's all over the internet. There was no funding for it.
I didn't say we're going to get the funding. I just said go for really big problems.
It wasn't a big problem either.
Well, it was.
For really little problems that go on lots of websites.